was utterly vanished. The sole remnant upon the ground was that diminutive caterpillar, intended to serve as the vessel for Yusak's spirit. Observing the larva led them to conclude that their incantation had, in actuality, succeeded, and the Demon King's essence was effectively imprisoned. With the Demon King eradicated, they were certain that no obstacles remained, and they would re-emerge with unprecedented strength. Nevertheless, a sagacious deity cautioned against excessive complacency. Vigilance was paramount. There was no predicting when another calamity of Yusak's magnitude might emerge. Thus, he devises a scheme, a stratagem to engineer the ideal receptacle for a saint within the mortal realm, and eradicate every last demon. However, another deity interjects, highlighting the immense magnitude of this endeavor, one that would deplete the energies of whomever elects to undertake this creation, the so-called saint. The volunteering god assures the others that it won't be overly arduous. His sole requirement is to locate a suitable soul to implant within the saint's corporeal form. As for the impudent skeletal demon lord, the deities are confident they have him ensnared within this larval form, and they relish the prospect of tormenting him as an insect for all time. Now, let's shift our attention to our protagonist's viewpoint. Having been swindled by those wretched gods, he discovers himself reborn in the body of an infant. He remains utterly clueless as to how this transpired. The sole logical deduction is that those scoundrels somehow bungled the confinement. The maidservants in attendance express elation upon noticing the saint's awakening. However, as Yusak scrutinizes these attendants, he swiftly discerns their malevolent intentions. Then, an attendant produces a feeding bottle. It's filled with a dubious, verdant fluid. This sight sends Yusak into a complete frenzy. He's petrified by the notion of imminent demise once more, mere moments after his nascent existence. And he's utterly bewildered as to why he's facing death again in this manner. The scoundrel clutching the poison-lace feeder offers our protagonist a twisted grin and expresses remorse for his impending action. The instant the servant attempts to insert the nipple into Yesak's mouth, the hapless child evades it, contorting his face. He thrashes his head from side to side. The servants begin to panic, confused as to why the sacred infant is rejecting sustenance. Well, Yesak undeniably possesses his justifications. Having finally attained humanity, he's unwilling to jeopardize his life by consuming something so patently suspect. Furthermore, he yearns to comprehend how on earth did he revert to human form in the first place? At this juncture, the attendants address him as Isaac, the very moniker used by all denizens of the underworld. In the deities of old, Yusak is utterly petrified. As the implication dawns upon him, he recalls that Yusak is merely an alternate pronunciation of his true name, Isaac. Even the Celestials uttered it when they banished him. Due to their erroneous pronunciation, he was spared from eternal confinement. Instead, he was reborn into a new vessel, bearing the same appellation. A wickedly delighted grin spreads across his countenance. To think those fools failed to imprison him. Seizing the moment, the servants shove the feeding bottle's nipple into his mouth. Both attendants strive to maintain the bottle's position, but the infant possesses surprising strength and resists fiercely. Finally, Isaac yields and ceases his struggle. The flavor is akin to consuming liquefied vegetables. Therefore, it's not a toxin. However, given the vile taste of this beverage, he'd frankly prefer risking a venomous substance. Then a sensation washes over him, a sinister presence infiltrating his physique. It appears a noxious agent was indeed introduced into the nourishment. The setting shifts to the grand helicentral temple of the Holy Empire. There, we observe an elderly fellow with a smug grin, relishing the presumed demise of Isaac, a prospective saint candidate. He believes Isaac must now be 6 feet under. At that juncture, the sovereign, the emperor of the Holy Empire Hela himself, Alexander Heathcliff Hela, encounters this aged man. Unexpectedly, Bishop Alexander happens to be present at the sacred site, paying a visit to the temple to meet with the aspiring saint from the esteemed Ashwa lineage. Naturally, behold, the esteemed bishop has arrived. Let his followers not neglect to incline their heads in deference to ultimate power. Alexander subsequently inquires about the elder's purpose for visiting. The old fellow feigns a grin and professes to have come to pay homage to the prospective saint of House Ishua. He asserts that the emperor shares this very intention. Amidst their reunion, a sudden clamor erupts, capturing everyone's notice. A correspondent arrives to deliver tidings concerning Isaac. Judging by the messenger's frantic intonation, it portends ill news. A wave of elation washes over the old man as he surmises that his scheme has borne fruit. Alexander and his retinue of knights hasten towards Isaac's chamber. However, contrary to widespread apprehension, the matter proves to be trivial. Isaac's abdomen has merely expanded. After consuming copious amounts of vegetable elixir, the staff disclosed that Isaac possesses a prodigious appetite. He's already consumed 15 flasks of that bland beverage. Endearing as this tidbit may be, it's equally distressing for the aged scoundrel. The mere fact that this youngster remains among the living, after ingesting 15 vials of venom, is utterly baffling him. To comprehend how our lad withstood this preposterous quantity of toxin, let's briefly revisit the past. Back to his initial encounter with that insipid vegetable elixir. The instant his system began assimilating the liquid, he sensed a menacing presence infiltrating his being. However, Isaac soon discerned that it was, in actuality, a consecrated poison, a potent toxic substance, engineered to eradicate the divine energies of religious figures. It doesn't manifest immediate consequences, but given its venomous nature, it becomes lethal if the organism absorbs an excessive amount. Nevertheless, this particular poison is derived from infernal manna, and given his past as a sovereign of the underworld, this concoction is essentially the ideal treat for Isaac. To him, it's akin to a euphoric herb. He could indulge in this all day long, and its flavor would remain consistently delightful, regardless of how frequently he partook. The instant he drained his initial vial, Isaac promptly erupted in a fit of pique, insisting upon another. The attendants had no recourse but to acquiesce, particularly because their directive was to ensure his sufficient consumption of the toxin. Thus, they were more than content to continue supplying him. However, Isaac wasn't protesting either. He was equally elated to assimilate all that infernal energy for himself. This venom facilitated his access to a domain transcending conscious thought, colloquially referred to as the subconscious realm. And deep within that domain, at its very nucleus, he aspired to forge his mana core. He then commences the procedure, and a sphere of flames erupts within his grasp. Subsequently, he begins incorporating the mana he assimilated from the toxic substance into the mana core, a prerequisite for his future magical abilities. He resolves to prepare it beforehand. However, his endeavor goes disastrously awry when the mana erupts. As the detonation dissipates, the sight that greets him is anything but ordinary. A monochrome is typically one of the three fundamental hues, yet in his instance, it's stark white. He's baffled by the unexpected coloration, but the true issue lies elsewhere. What truly unnerves him is the immense, staggering potency emanating from this minuscule core, which hasn't even reached full maturity. Despite the seemingly terrifying nature of this phenomenon, it evokes a grin from our protagonist. This is a genuine stroke of luck, a fortunate turn of events. It surpasses his wildest imaginings, exceeding all expectations. The notion of such formidable power, confined within this diminutive form, is exhilarating. Furthermore, should he refine himself adequately, the potential is simply unfathomable. Into what manner of creature he shall ultimately transform. Poised on the precipice of ascension, he contemplates his prior existence, a life wherein he was condemned to perish. As a pitiful failure, devoid of accomplishment, his sole aspiration was mere survival. And that profound yearning propelled his rebirth as a skeletal figure. He toiled relentlessly as a demonic entity, conjuring novel enchantments and abilities through unwavering diligence. And now, it appears those incantations have been bequeathed to this diminutive form. Meanwhile, as Isaac was immersed in his inner turmoil, the pair of attendants succumbed to alarm. For a fleeting instant, they apprehended that the youth might have expired, seeing as he remained utterly motionless for a span. Then, abruptly, Isaac extended a digit towards the heavens, and after amplifying his vocalizations to their utmost capacity, he commenced to clamor for an additional vial of toxin. Returning to the present, Alexander and his retinue experience a sense of respite, observing that the circumstances are less dire than anticipated. Even our protagonist experiences a wave of relief. He nearly believed he was on the verge of being eliminated. Fortunately, no actual harm befell him, though he may be oblivious. Our friend was practically moments away from an assassination attempt. Just then, Isaac perceives the bishop fixing him with a gaze of utter disdain. This prompts our young protagonist to ponder. Why the devil is this fellow glaring at me with such animosity? He briefly speculates that perhaps he overindulged, thus inciting these unwarranted scowls. However, he swiftly dismisses the notion and resolves to simply feign childish innocence. He's determined not to overreact or behave conspicuously in a manner that might garner undesirable notice. Therefore, he maintains the facade of an oblivious youngster, while the elder seethes with barely suppressed fury. From the old man's perspective, Isaac ought to be prostrate, hemorrhaging, gasping for his final breaths. Instead, the impudent child is beaming radiantly. It's almost as if his actions are purely for the purpose of ridicule, and that's intensely aggravating this elderly gentleman. A few days earlier, at the Holy See's Central Command, a revelation was made. Whomever is granted the esteemed title of saint would subsequently acquire dominion over the Holy Empire. And this fair-haired individual isn't even remotely pleased by this news. He's utterly convinced that the aristocracy's fervent desire to pronounce one of their offspring as the saint stems solely from the authority inherent in the designation, and he covets this power entirely for himself. The same aged individual, the bishop, pledges to his superior that he will address the other saint contenders, ensuring no one remains to obstruct their path. The blond man then probes about some unsettling hearsay he's encountered. As per the rumors circulating, a novel saint prospect has emerged from House Ishua, the very lineage possessing strong affiliations with the emperor. It appears they're discussing our protagonist. The bishop instantly becomes rigid, fully aware that confronting House Ishua's prospective saint presents his most formidable challenge, yet he nonetheless guarantees his superior the boy's demise, well before the emperor has the opportunity to anoint him as the chosen one. However, it appears this favored son remains discontent, prompting him to command the bishop's return to House Ishua to confirm the saint candidate's death and provide a detailed account. This golden-haired individual is none other than Cardinal Harry Barrett, the patriarch of House Barrett. His principal ambition is to eradicate all other potential saints belonging to competing lineages, ensuring the next saint hails from his own bloodline. House Barrett, currently, as the elder observes the very much living child before him, he is consumed by dread, anticipating his doom. Frozen in place, his only recourse is to succumb to a cold sweat, acutely conscious that the cardinal will demand retribution for this failure. Meanwhile, Alexander is utterly captivated by Isaac's remarkable platinum blonde hair. It evokes the image of the empire's progenitor, who possessed the same hair hue. The elderly gentleman in the background begins to lose his composure. For him, likening this youngster to the Holy Empire's founder is pure sacrilege. Overhearing the bishop utilize "Your Majesty" as an honorific for Alexander, Isaac swiftly deduces that this individual must be the emperor himself. Alexander, in turn, continues to state undeniable truths. On the other hand, he keeps stating irrefutable facts. He ventures so far as to assert that Isaac possesses a greater divine connection than the current pontiff, making him the ultimate saint contender. This revelation nearly sends our young man into a state of utter astonishment. To conceive of a youth like him as a saint candidate was entirely unforeseen. The bishop, naturally, is exceedingly displeased by this development. The emperor is beginning to show partiality towards our protagonist, and this cantankerous old man simply cannot permit that to transpire. He initiates action, pivoting towards Alexander. He beseeches authorization to personally examine the infant. His contention: there's an aura of peculiarity surrounding the boy. After all, no newborn should possess the capacity to consume such a quantity of vegetable juice. However, Alexander perceives nothing amiss with a prospective saint, guzzling down monastic fare. In the meantime, Isaac grapples with comprehending the recently revealed facts. The shocking revelations have left him reeling. How could he, the erstwhile sovereign of demons, conceivably be a contender for sainthood? The unyielding bishop, however, persists in his demand to scrutinize the child. At last, Alexander grants his approval, but he also stipulates that they must postpone action until a representative from House Ishua arrives. Meanwhile, our protagonist nonchalantly expels surplus demonic energy through a burp, a consequence of his excessive consumption. But the instant he comprehends his action, he swiftly covers his mouth with his hand. For a fleeting moment, he genuinely fears he may have compromised his disguise. And indeed, it appears he undoubtedly succeeded. For now, this despicable old geezer has discovered the ideal pretext to scrutinize him. He purportedly detected malevolent energy emanating from the youngster. As the scoundrel draws nearer, our unfortunate protagonist can only steel himself. The bishop is adamant that this child must be a fraudulent saint candidate, harboring tainted magical essence. He demands the immediate presence of an inquisitor to examine him, but Alexander grows increasingly irritated, listening to this old fool spout drivel about a saint candidate. To alleviate the tension, the bishop guarantees him there's no cause for alarm, for the pontiff has already designated the saint, none other than the child hailing from House Barrett. This revelation genuinely astonishes Alexander. He deems it preposterous that the Pope coincidentally chose a child from his own lineage. And finally, everything becomes clear to Isaac regarding why this old wretch is endeavoring to eliminate him. Capitalizing on the opportunity, the bishop swiftly gathers Isaac into his embrace, asserting the need to escort the boy to a clergyman and request the presence of an inquisitor for a thorough examination. However, before he can make much headway, the emperor intercepts him. Alexander pointedly reminds the bishop that House Eshua stands as the imperial family's staunchest affiliate, and as the reigning sovereign, he strongly advises this elderly fellow to postpone his assessment of the child. The obstinate old man freezes in his position, only to retort with a counterargument. This time, he delivers a subtle yet unambiguous warning directed at the emperor. It appears the pontiff has conveyed that the coronation ceremony for the heir apparent will be deferred until the saint selection process concludes. Essentially, the Pope is issuing